So Mangala Devi Dasi will be our speaker for today, and will speak about Bhagavad-gītā verse 438 from the Bhagavad-gītā As It Is. She has a doctorate degree in psychology and has been around in Berlin and before that in Dresden for quite some time. Ever since I have come to the temple, I remember seeing her occasionally in the temple in Leipzig back then, and nowadays in Berlin, and sometimes online. And she is very well versed in various books and different topics in Krishna consciousness, so she can truly give you some interesting insights today. And I will hand over to you, and hope we have a nice and inspiring lecture. And if you have any questions, of course, you can post them into the chat box, or you can post or ask them later on by unmuting yourselves. You probably know how to do that, since we're all now very familiar with Zoom. And yeah, I'm excited to see what's happening. And I already know that she will be giving a visual presentation, so we are looking forward to that. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone. So wonderful to see all of you. Can you hear me? Okay, that looks good. Yeah, well, so nice to see all of your faces. So I will just dive right into the verse, begin reading Bhagavad-gītā 438 is where we were last. Nahi jñānena sadṛśaṁ pavitram iha vidyate tat svayam yoga-saṁsiddhaḥ kālenātmani vindati. Na means nothing. He means certainly. Jñānena means with knowledge. Sadṛśaṁ in comparison. Pavitram sanctified. Iha in this world. Vidyate means exists. Tat means that. Svayam himself. Yoga in devotion. Saṁsiddhaḥ he who is mature. Kālena in course of time. Ātmani in himself, and vindati enjoys. In this world, translation, in this world, there is nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism. And one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. Purport. When we speak of transcendental knowledge, we do so in terms of spiritual understanding. As such, there is nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Ignorance is the cause of our bondage, and knowledge is the cause of our liberation. This knowledge is the mature fruit of devotional service. And when one is situated in transcendental knowledge, he need not search for peace elsewhere, for he enjoys peace within himself. In other words, this knowledge and peace culminate in Krishna consciousness. That is the last word in the Bhagavad-gītā. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatjade Shatarine Om Jnana Timirandasya Ganandana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so we have a very fundamental verse here. There's a similar verse, actually a couple similar verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam. One of them is very often, Prabhupada quotes very often. That is verse 1-7. You've probably heard Prabhupada quoting this. It's by rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. It starts with Vasudeva Bhagavati, so Prabhupada often quotes this. And the interesting thing is that Sutta Goswami answers Shaunaka's question there. And the question was, what is the essential recommendation of all Shastras? And the answer is to perform bhakti. And then you get knowledge and detachment. So this verse that we are talking about today kind of answers the conclusion of all the Shastras, which lots of verses in the Gita do, I know. But anyway, to make you more motivated to dive into this verse, we have a logical way of concluding that this verse discusses the essence of all the recommendations of the Shastras. And like Karuna Shakti has already said, I would like to visualize some of the thoughts that I'll be sharing from Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas, so that you can kind of keep an overview. So I'll just turn this screen sharing on right now. I think you should be able to hear and see me, and then at the same time see what I'm drawing. So this is inspired by a psychologist called Russ Harris, not the content, but the visualization. So, and it's a very fundamental visualization of our situation in this world. And that is, we're always active. We're always doing something, right? So even if we're just sitting staring at the wall, we are doing something. And whatever we do, it either brings us closer to Krishna or it brings us away from Krishna. So we have these two choices in life. We do things that bring us towards Krishna, and we do things that bring us away from Krishna. That's basically, this sums up our whole life and everything we do. And towards moves are things that help us progress in Krishna consciousness, help us to develop love for Krishna, help us to develop our relationship with Krishna, help us to develop transcendental knowledge. It's things like remembering Krishna, serving Krishna, hearing, chanting, serving devotees, being compassionate to everyone. And the away moves are things that we do that take us away from Krishna and our values and our goals. These are things that we do out of a mentality of being turned away from Krishna. So we do out of, Buddha Bhavana calls this God complex, out of our God complex, which means that we think we are God. That's what the materialism is, right? We forget that we are part of the whole and think that we are the supreme. And these are things we do that are moved by, also sometimes called the enemies in spiritual life: lust, anger, greed. Also things like fear, illusion, and attempts at, Srila Prabhupada would say, attempts at sense gratification. So these are the two things. And the interesting thing is now that what causes us to choose one over the other as we go through our day, right? We go through our day and we're constantly going back and forth between towards moves and away moves. And the more we are able to choose towards moves, the more we will be able to progress in spiritual life and move closer to Krishna. So it's very helpful to try to understand, why am I doing something towards Krishna, or why am I doing something that takes me away from Krishna? And these are small moments throughout the day. So this is one thing that you can definitely start doing after this lecture, is observing those moments during your day in which you make this decision, consciously or unconsciously, to do something that moves you towards Krishna or away from Krishna. And so what happens is that we are in a situation, or some thoughts come up, or we feel some emotions, and this triggers a toward move or an away move. And so this is happening the whole time. It's like the material world is like a river that kind of splashes on us, and all of those waves are these triggers, situations, thoughts, emotions. And the question is if we are able to remain unbound by all of that, or does all of this have the power to hook us, to bind us, to take us, to jerk us around, to carry us away from Krishna? So to be able to do a towards move, we have to be, in Srila Prabhupada's words, unbound. And what causes us to do away moves is being bound by those situations, or hooked. Yeah, we get hooked by those situations, and then we're gone. We're in Maya again. So, and the better we get at unhooking ourselves, the better we'll be able to stay with Krishna throughout our life. So this is something that we can learn, unhooking skills, so to say. And Srila Prabhupada has a nice example for this state of being unbound or unhooked. He compares it to the sun. And he says, quoting again this verse from the Bhagavatam, Vasudeva Bhagavati, he says, when one engages fully in the activities of devotional service, bhakti yoga, he becomes just like the sun reflected on water. Although a devotee appears to be in the material world, actually, he's in the transcendental world. As the sun reflected on water appears to be on the water, but it's many millions of miles away from the water, so one engaged in the bhakti yoga process is nirguna, or unaffected by the qualities of material nature. So here we have another word, unaffected, unbound, unhooked. So this is what allows us to move towards Krishna, when we become unaffected, unhooked, unbound, like the sun. And during last week, I had to get a blood check, which I have to do regularly. And that's a typical situation that I wanted to give it as an example. While I was sitting there, I thought I can actually give this as an example today. It's a situation that is like one of those thoughts, emotions, situation that can trigger or move me away or towards Krishna. And it has the power to take me away from spiritual consciousness, because it's something that I don't enjoy. It can make me feel anxious and tense if I know that, like, I expose my arm and I can see the needle coming. I'm not afraid of needles, but it's just not a nice situation, to have your blood drawn. I'm sure that you've probably all experienced this, or any kind of medical invasion is always a little bit something that can carry us away. It can hook us and then make us anxious, tense, fearful. And as we know, there's no reason to be anxious, tense, or fearful, because those are material emotions. So what I do since many years, it's like a sadhana. When I sit there and I have my arm exposed, I turn my face away from the whole procedure, and I just keep repeating to myself, you're Krishna's servant, you're not this body. You're not this body, you're Krishna's servant. And I can't tell you how much this helps me to be unhooked and not get hooked by the needle, to be anxious, to be tense, afraid, but to just kind of observe what's happening with my body, but inside, not feel attached to that, not feel hooked by that. So this is basically what we have to learn throughout our whole life, to remain unhooked like that, no matter what is happening, because there's always something going on in the material world that has the potential to hook us and carry us away from Krishna. And this is where we now come to this wonderful verse of 438, that this is where transcendental knowledge helps us. Because for one, it helps us because it's something that we can study and read and then remember, and then also remember in those situations. So if we have filled our mind with knowledge about the truth, it's very easy to remain unhooked, because then we can go back to what we've read and heard and then reattach our mind to that instead of allowing it to get hooked and bound and affected. And the second way, so it helps in those situations. And the second way it helps is because it helps also along the path, because we develop like a constant awareness of this reality, which becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So the way we see the world, our mindset, it shifts towards a constant awareness of spiritual truths. And so this is basically right now, this is like the bare structure of our situation in this world, and why we need transcendental knowledge. We need it so that we can stay unhooked by all the events, and that we can remain unbound, unaffected, and keep moving towards Krishna and do the things that we think are important to do, and not get hooked and jerked around and grabbed by the material energy and just thrown into activities and thoughts that we don't even want to be having. And now I would like to, so this is the bare structure, and I'd like to fill it up with more detail. And what I did is I did a bit of a research of all the places in which Prabhupada quotes this verse 438. And then, because he doesn't quote this verse that much, I also expanded it a bit towards similar verses in the Bhagavatam. One, I was researching this Vasudeva Bhagavati verse. It's 127, by rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. And then I also researched into information we can get to understand this bare structure better from Srimad Bhagavatam 11:242. And this is also a very famous verse that in the last part says that by devotion, or that through the practice of bhakti, we simultaneously get devotion, detachment, and knowledge, or a direct experience of spiritual truths. Just like when someone's eating, simultaneously experiences pleasure, nourishment, and relief from hunger at the same time. So this is also a verse that mentions transcendental knowledge, the importance of it and the effect of it. And then the last verse that I also included in this research was Bhagavatam 4:29-37. Unless one renders devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, one cannot possibly become completely detached from this world, nor can he possibly manifest real knowledge. So also a similar content, that through bhakti you can develop detachment and knowledge. And the first question that I wanted to get an answer to while researching through these verses is, what exactly do we know when we have transcendental knowledge? What are we aware of? What do we experience when we experience transcendental knowledge? So this is question number one that we will be diving into now. So this is the transcendental knowledge, but what exactly do we know? And we have, the first quote is from a lecture Srila Prabhupada gave on the Bhagavad-gītā verse that I'm talking, or that we are discussing today. And Prabhupada says, therefore knowledge, we must seek knowledge. And the perfection of knowledge, as we've seen several times explained in this meeting, the perfection of knowledge is to understand Krishna. That's all. And so this is the first thing that we understand when we have transcendental knowledge. We understand Krishna. And in the verse 127 from the Bhagavatam, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he qualifies the knowledge about Krishna even more. And he says, knowledge means that we have knowledge and experience of Krishna's form, Krishna's qualities, and Krishna's sweetness. So this is the first aspect. But there's another thing that we know when we have transcendental knowledge, and that is, Srila Prabhupada says, and this is also from a lecture on this, on a couple verses from the Gita, 437 to 440. And Srila Prabhupada says, after quoting this Bhagavad-gītā verse, the Lord says again, there's nothing purified things in this world except jnana, or knowledge. What is that knowledge? That knowledge is that I am part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, my business is to dovetail myself with the Supreme Consciousness. I am individual consciousness, and I shall be dovetailed with the Supreme Consciousness. That is jnana. So the second thing we know is we know who we are. We know who the jiva is. We know that we are, as Prabhupada says, I am part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, my business is to dovetail myself with the Supreme Consciousness. And in another context where Prabhupada quotes this verse, he also quotes this famous verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Jivara Svarupa Hoy Krishnera Nityadas, that we realize when we've transcendental knowledge, I don't actually permanently have anything to do with all the things that I think I have to do with in this world, because actually I am eternally a servant of Krishna. Now, the next interesting question that I thought we could have an answer to, or that I found that the scriptures give us further answers to in this verse, is to the effect of that knowledge. So what happens when we have transcendental knowledge? How can we notice that we have transcendental knowledge, or why would we even want transcendental knowledge? Like what's the benefit? Who cares? No, we should care, but why? So Prabhupada also, in the purport to this verse, he already mentions one word, and that is that we experience peace when we have transcendental knowledge. So, oops. And Bhaktivedanta Thakur, when he translates this Gita verse, he didn't use the word peace, but he used the word satisfaction. That's, yeah, maybe I'll add that too. And another interesting thing that always comes up in this connection with transcendental knowledge is that we also get detachment. Those Bhagavatam verses mention it again and again. So we get detachment from the material world and attachment to Krishna. So we get a detachment from the away moves, or from being bound, and we get an attachment towards Krishna. Here's another beautiful quote where Prabhupada says this: if one is advanced in Krishna consciousness, material activities, both sinful and pious, become automatically distasteful to him. That is the test of Krishna consciousness. Both pious and impious activities are actually due to ignorance, because a living entity, as an eternal servant of Krishna, has no need to act for his personal sense gratification. Therefore, as soon as one is reclaimed to the platform of devotional service, he relinquishes his attachment for pious and impious activities and is interested only in what will satisfy Krishna. This process of bhakti, devotional service to Krishna, relieves one from the reactions of all activities. And still on the topic of the effects of transcendental knowledge, in one lecture, Prabhupada quotes this verse from the Gita and says, so as soon as we become, revived to our position, Brahma Bhuta, then our first symptom will be prasannatma. We shall be joyful. And interestingly, Prabhupada also, in the connection of one of the Bhagavatam verses that I included in the research, he says that he also mentions again this topic of how we can test ourselves if we have transcendental knowledge, but he doesn't say the positive things in that context. He says the negative things that we should be seeing as going away from our lives. And he says that is jealousy or envy. So the effect is that we have more of this and less envy or jealousy. You know, envy and jealousy, with that is meant this feeling that I don't want someone to be happy. And that sounds pretty tough. Like right now you may be thinking, yeah, I want everyone to be happy. Why? I don't have envy. I'm happy when others are happy, but it's often also connected to the things that we want. So if we see someone that has something that we want, to then still be able to say, I'm glad this person has that and I don't, that is the real test. So when you see a devotee getting some special mercy that you really would also like to get, to feel like, I'm so happy this devotee gets to experience that. And not to feel like, why is this devotee getting this mercy? This devotee doesn't deserve that mercy. And then, the mind comes up with all these rationalizations about why we should be getting the mercy and not this devotee. And all those things, they sound very reasonable, like I was in Krishna consciousness much longer than this devotee. Why is this devotee getting this mercy? Or, I don't know, I was in the prasadam room first. Why does this devotee get cake first? The mind will come up with reasons that sound logical, but actually it's just envy trying to trying to hook us, trying to creep into our mind and just take over. So this is where we can really see if we have imbibed transcendental knowledge in our life, if we can wholeheartedly say, I'm so happy that this devotee gets to be this lucky and gets to have all of this mercy, even if I don't have it. Okay, so we have discussed what we know when we have transcendental knowledge. We've discussed the effect of transcendental knowledge. And the next question that I found lots of answers to, and it's actually the last big question for today, is how we can get transcendental knowledge. So this one of the Bhagavatam verses that already answers this question, saying by rendering devotional service or by taking shelter of Krishna, the other one says, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. And in the purports to this verse, our acharyas encourage us, especially Srila Prabhupada. He always, when he quotes this verse, he often says, it's so easy, it's so simple, just sit down, think of Krishna, everything is fine. He's always like, what's the big deal? Just manmana bhava mad bhakto, that's it, nothing more is required. And he says, if you want to get in contact with Krishna, It'll be very sublime. And even if you're a neophyte, it's very easy. And Vishwan Chakravarti Thakur says, the beauty is also that we don't need any other practice. Bhakti yoga is enough, which is what this verse Vasudeva Bhagavati says. And Srila Prabhupada also comments on this in one lecture. He says, all these religious principles can be achieved immediately if you place your love unto Krishna. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga means devotional. If you try to serve in devotional service Krishna, then all these principles of religions will automatically come. You will know that I'm not this body, I'm a spirit soul. This material attachment is useless for me. My real business is spiritual advancement of life. Everything will be clear if you simply execute devotional service of Krishna. Vasudeva Bhagavati. So we don't it's really not that hard in that sense. We don't have to do hundreds of rituals, yagyas, and things to get transcendental knowledge. We just have to practice bhakti yoga. So this is our main process. Our only process, not our main process. And Srila Prabhupada, I have another quote where Prabhupada speaks about this, which was very beautiful, where he emphasizes that bhakti can give us all this renouncement and knowledge. And he also very beautifully expresses what bhakti means. So I'm sure you've heard this verse. We've talked about it last week also, this Anyabhilashita Shunyam verse, where Rupa Goswami says bhakti means to just want to do things for Krishna. So that's the essence of bhakti, to just want to please Krishna, want to see Krishna happy. And Srila Prabhupada now is expressing this like this in the lecture. Our activities, I'm going to just read it the way he said it, even if it has some English mistakes. Our activities are surrounding only about Krishna. We do not do anything except Krishna business. We are publishing magazine, that is Krishna. We are publishing books, that is Krishna. We are going to the press, that is for Krishna. We are going to the market, that is for Krishna. We are cooking, that is for Krishna. We are living only for Krishna. We are dancing for Krishna. We are chanting for Krishna. So we have renounced. The same things are there in material life, publishing book or going to the press, typing or microphone or dancing, chanting. These are, but they're not for Krishna. That is for sense gratification. So vairagya means no more working for sense gratification. That is vairagya. That is renouncement. Only for working Krishna, for the satisfaction of Krishna, that is called vairagya. And to attain this vairagya, renouncement, one requires sufficient knowledge. That is called jnāna. So this knowledge and renouncement, two things required in human life. So basically that's the essence. What Prabhupada kept repeating in this quote was for Krishna. To see like, how can you spend your life doing everything for Krishna? Of course, we can't just go like this and then from today to tomorrow, everything is done for Krishna. It's a gradual process and it needs time, that's clear. But to ask ourselves this question every day, what can I do so that this day will be a day for Krishna? And that it will be a day for Krishna a little bit more than yesterday was. So I have a few more verses on how that are a little bit more specifying. And Srila Prabhupada, for example, when quoting one of the Bhagavatam verses that I was researching, he said that we should, especially if we want to develop transcendental knowledge and do that through the practice of bhakti, we should specifically do it by hearing and chanting about Krishna. So these are definitely our two main processes. And whatever you're doing, you need to make sure that you hear and chant. Because even if you, let's say, even if, like recently I heard a devotee, well, let's not give an example, but you know, our days are filled with lots of activities and they can all be done for Krishna. And maybe sometime, but if on the long run we don't hear and chant, we won't be able to make progress, because hearing and chanting is the basis of that transcendental knowledge, which we need to, so that all the other activities that we do can be spiritualized. So just see how you can hear and chant. And here's another beautiful quote from Srila Prabhupada in this connection. He says, when one becomes detached from material attraction, engages fully in devotional service, that is changelessness. It's another word for, you know, being unhooked, unbound, unaffected. Akartijvat means not doing anything for sense gratification. When one does something at his own risk, there's a sense of proprietorship, and therefore there's a reaction. But when one does everything for Krishna, there is no proprietorship over the activities. So this is again emphasizing bhakti and do it for Krishna. And then you can also have this mindset that, you know, I'm doing this for Krishna, so it's his. So he's the one who is in charge of the result. He's in charge of choosing this activity or of inspiring me to do it. And that is also, you know, that way you can do what Prabhupada recommends with dovetail your consciousness with Krishna. And also, I don't want to get into all of the quotes, I think, but in this connection, Srila Prabhupada also often speaks about yukta vairagya, because knowledge is often associated with detachment, which is also what I spoke about here in this graphic of being unbound, unhooked. And that could maybe seem like we're renouncing such things and just turning our back to everything, but Prabhupada always emphasizes that's not what we're doing. We are just changing our vision from seeing things as things that I want to enjoy to seeing them as, how can Krishna enjoy this? How can I use this in Krishna's service? Here, for example, in one sentence, Prabhupada explains this mind shift. I do not want any more of this material sense gratification, but I want Krishna. And he also says, when you're spiritually advanced, then there is no difference between this material world and spiritual world, because if you've managed to go all the toward moves and become unhooked and unbound, you see the waves of material life, but you don't see them as they don't become a distraction for you, because for you, they will just be things that will inspire you to think even more of Krishna. And so how do we get transcendental knowledge? We get it by bhakti yoga, for Krishna, hearing and chanting. But the actual ingredient, like where does the transcendental knowledge come from, is Krishna's mercy. So by our endeavors, Krishna gives us his mercy, and by his mercy, we get the transcendental knowledge. And here's a quote where Prabhupada says this: the Supreme Lord Krishna is so merciful that when a living entity understands that the personality Krishna is the source of everything and surrenders to the Lord, Krishna personally takes charge of him and reveals to him. You know, reveal means he shows you. He reveals to him within his heart that he is under the Lord's full protection. So this is what actually transcendental knowledge means. It means to see Krishna, or Prabhupada sometimes says to be able to talk to him. And that this happens, Krishna shows himself to us through our endeavors in bhakti, out of his mercy. And Prabhupada continues, thus devotion, direct experience of the personality of Godhead and detachment from other objects become manifest even in the beginning stage of bhakti yoga. So Prabhupada is kind of telling us that in the beginning, the first like real realizations that we will have that are not just something we read, but something we saw, those realizations may not be that Krishna is dancing in the rasa dance, but those realizations may be that we see how Krishna is protecting us. It's kind of still related to our identity in this world. And in this identity, we get hooked, we get afraid, we feel like we're in danger. And that's when Krishna comes and says, no, don't worry. There's no reason to be afraid, to become bound, attached, hooked. You're under my full protection. And now I would like to come to a close because I also want to see if you have any questions. And the last thing that I just want to address, which the acharyas have stated repeatedly in connection in this verse, with this verse, and always highlighted, was this word in the verse kālena. So kālena means in due course of time. So this is important because it's like, on the one hand, it says that, you know, it will happen. One day you will make that direct experience. You will have those realizations and you will have that knowledge. Or you can even feel it now, because according to as long as, you know, time passes and the knowledge increases with passing time. So whatever you've been practicing, for whatever amount of time you've been practicing, you will have experienced some things, some of those effects that we mentioned or that we found of transcendental knowledge, or even transcendental knowledge directly. So this is the first thing. It's kind of like a guarantee. It will happen. You know, if you practice bhakti, this will happen. It's not like a nice philosophy someone came up with just to give us some motivation because it sounds good. It's truth. It will happen. And the second thing that this word highlights is that we need to be patient also, that it just needs time, that we can't expect to wake up tomorrow and just be fully enlightened. Maybe it'll happen, but maybe not. And if it doesn't happen, we will still continue. Because if we expect our progress to be too quick and too soon, we might become discouraged and leave. You know, I think this is one of the main reasons devotees leave, is because they feel that, oh, I've been chanting for 10 years and I haven't seen Krishna, let me leave. But that's kind of short-sighted because it just takes time. And so Srila Prabhupada says, by becoming Krishna conscious, by this bhakti yoga, you can be successful. In due course of time, you will understand that, yes, I am on the right path. In due course of time. Immediately, you may be doubtful. Have I accepted the right path or not? But kālena, in due course, if you continue. So this is the last thing that this verse, I'll write it down to the how. I'll just write patience. Just to remind us that it just takes time, but it's a question of time, not a question of if it will happen. So we have now like 15 more minutes. I just want to see if you have any questions. Maybe I will stop the screen sharing, I think. Yeah, Karuna Shakti is also nodding, because then we can see your faces when you ask questions. If anyone has one.
I can see there are two people or two accounts with raised hands. That's Lisa and Jayadev and Krishna Katha Prabhu. I don't know who was first, but they obviously have a comment or a question.
Yeah, it was Jayadev Prabhu. Prabhu, you can go ahead and then I'll follow.
Krishna Katha, you were first, but anyway, I don't want to interrupt now. Yeah, thank you, dear Mangala. That was beautiful. I really, first of all, I have to say I adore your visualization Visualisierungsskills. We love it. Great. You know? And the question is, I would like to hear from you, how do you apply this idea to a job, actually? You know? Because for me, I found it, I got the experience that it can be extremely difficult to get in a detached state of mind, job-wise, especially when I experienced that I was struggling, you know, to be successful. And there's a certain pressure, and it's existential. Yeah. And so I would like to hear from you about your experience and your vision. Thank you.
Yeah. So like what you're saying, like the example that I gave in the lecture was, I guess, like a small situation. And now you're asking, but what do we do with like bigger situations that are more drastic? Like if there's stress in a job and I might lose my job, or there's just this question or this pressure of, yeah, it becomes existential. And the way I see it is that, you know, we're surrounded by opportunities to become more Krishna conscious. Some of them are smaller and some of them are bigger. And for example, this thing that I gave in the lecture with like my blood being taken, that's maybe a smaller situation and a smaller issue, but then there are bigger ones like what you mentioned, that maybe we'll lose our job and then not have an income, or maybe we'll just be demoted into some position or to some activities that we don't want to be doing. And it can get even bigger, you know. The biggest test in the end of life is when we die. I mean, just imagine losing everything you've built up and not become hooked by that. To be detached, unbound, changeless, what Prabhupada says, and to just I think what I want to say, the first thing I want to say is that it's natural that as long as we are a conditioned soul, that we will always feel unsere Grenzen, like where our limits, we will also always feel our limits. And then we can see, okay, here I still have an issue. This is something that hooks me. So that's, I think, the first important thing, to become aware of that. This is something that hooks me. And the more you become aware of it, then you can maybe even try to see which concrete situations at your job hook you. I'm sure not every situation. Maybe if you come in the morning and sit down at your desk, that's maybe not already a hooking situation or something that binds you. To maybe observe, when do you feel like that? Maybe is it in interaction with your boss, or is it when you have a very difficult client or patient, or I don't know, however you would call the people you interact with and you do service for? Because the more you can become aware of the concrete situation it happens in, the better you can reflect on that and then prepare for those situations, so that the next time they come, you can already recognize, okay, now this is happening again. This is where I always get hooked. And you know that, because this is what helped me with the blood thing. I know that I will become anxious if I don't unhook myself. So if you know this will make you hooked, you know, you can go into the situation already kind of charged up on transcendental awareness. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like an armor. And then when the situation comes, maybe it'll still be hard, but not as hard anymore, because you've already prepared yourself. You know, okay, this guy is coming again. This guy is always makes me furious or hooks me, and just, you know, and then you can already tell yourself, I'm a spirit soul. I'm doing this for Krishna. So this whole endeavor is his responsibility. He's the one who decides over the outcome. He's the one who decides what will happen, so let me trust him. And to, you know, in that way to surrender to Krishna's plan, in the sense of saying, you know, Krishna, I'm ready for everything that you want me to happen. I mean, this is hard, I know, but yeah, that's what came to my mind. Maybe someone else has something to add, or how do you deal with these kind of things? What helps you stay unhooked with job pressure?
Actually, I had the, thanks for the lecture, Mataji, it was really good. I had the similar question what Jayadev Prabhu had asked. I don't know if it serves as an answer or not, but I wanted to ask the same question on the same lines. Yeah, even I was going through the same. There's some kind of pressure at work or something. For me personally, I did not consider it as a pressure, because at the end of the day, we have this philosophy that, okay, it's all temporary. Like it's just the momentary pressure which acts on your mind and so on. So I can be relieved of it. And at the same time, there are too many things to do, and like one thing on the other, and I cannot even avoid that. So that's kind of helpless situation. And what I observed is in our team as well, like almost everyone is at the level of being burned out. And then I was thinking like, okay, maybe it's not that intense on me because we have some philosophy. As you said, like the chanting and hearing is the basis. And somehow I was able to, I'm pushing it somehow, but on the same lines, maybe I'm bringing up these questions almost on every occasion, in the sanghas and so on. It's not just to push the idea, but rather to get help for myself. And then when I consider the other perspective, when we see like in this, when we are somehow hooked up into this artificial economy or somehow, and I also get a feeling like, I mean, I want to grow, but at the same time, the more I'm growing, there's a lot of responsibilities that coming up, and at the same time, the pressure also coming up. And you cannot avoid it as well. Like the moment you grow, you get the responsibilities, and when you feel stressed at that point, and you cannot go back either. Like, oh no, I just want to go back to where I was and so on. So I mean, it's a conundrum to decide this and so on. And so I was on the parallel line. I was thinking like maybe Krishna's economy, the economy. He did not say like you have to work and so on. But on the other side, we also hear in the devotee circle like you have to maintain your material life. You have to get success at the material life. I mean, when we get into these practical situations, I see like, no, I mean, there's something going wrong. Like this is not the thing. Because the more I'm spending the energy, because 9 hours you spend at your work, like the mode of passion and mode of ignorance, the amount of time you spend in these other two modes is much more than the mode of goodness you are. So, I mean, how do you see from your perspective as a devotee, and also you do a lot of consulting on the other side, whether is this the right mentality to think that, okay, you're working 9 hours and so on, like you're growing and so on, but at the same time, you're somehow sacrificing, you're squeezing your chanting in between or listening, hearing sessions and so on. So how do you see it from that perspective? So just to summarize my question, should one plan in such a way that somehow he has to get rid of this thing? So to make your life more simple and get off the track, plan your life in such a way, or do you see like, no, you have to work or do it in the service of Krishna and so on, which I found like maybe it's not practical is what I observed.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kartik. That's also something I often think about actually. Like, because it's a question, how do I spend my time in this world? And isn't it nice to spend it as spiritual as possible? Wouldn't it be nice to just, sit in Vrindavan under a tree, just, chant? And actually, Vishwan Chakravarti Thakur, when he speaks about this Vasudeva Bhagavati verse, he says, this transcendental knowledge has to come from he says it in the purport to this verse of the Gita. It has to come from ātmani. This word is in the verse. From ātmani, that means from here, from inside, from our heart. And it can't be done artificially. And what the example that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives is when someone just dresses as a sannyasi and then thinks, now I have transcendental knowledge, which obviously is not the way it works. So I think sometimes, I think we just have to be careful not to be premature in our shift to like how we design our life. I mean, I think in a way it's natural. Lots of devotees start like this. I'm never getting married. I will be brahmachari forever. And then like 20 years later, they do decide. I mean, it's totally, you know, it's okay. It's fine. But to be sure that we don't do something that we will maybe regret later. Like, for example, Krishna Kshetram Swami, when he got his sannyas, I was there. I was lucky to be there when he got his sannyas initiation. And he was like, I think he was in his 60s. He was old, you know, I mean, he wasn't like in his 20s, like lots of his godbrothers. And he said, better safe than sorry. And I thought that was really interesting. He wanted to make sure that when he takes this step, he will be 100% sure that he will continue like this, you know, he won't regret it. So I think just on the level of organizing our life, sure, I do think it's helpful to perhaps have a plan how we can work less and less with, like, you know, like work that is mainly meant to maintain our bodies. Like, and I don't think, and that can be lots of different strategies, like if preparing, like saving some money for when you're rentner, when you're in pension, you know, like for example, Vaidyanath Prabhu, Satchidananda Maharaj's brother, he worked, I think, like as an insurance, for an insurance company, if I'm not mistaken, and now he's in pension. I think he's like over 67, so now he has his pension, and he just speaks now on Bhakti Shastris and everything. So that's beautiful how he could, you know, prepare his life for also having such a phase at the end of his life where he could really let go of all of that. So I think it's really helpful to make such a plan that for some way you will be able to drop all that work at some point. When that point is, I think that really is up to Krishna. Like for some devotees, he does it earlier, for some he does it later. I think for that you just have to keep your eyes open and see what Krishna manages for you. But I would never exclude it, you know, to also do it earlier. If Krishna says for some, like, okay, now your business is like worth, I don't know, 10 million, maybe just sell it and then sit down in Vrindavan or whatever, you know, like, why not, you know, why not then just sell everything and go sit in Vrindavan? I don't think there's a problem if it comes from inside the Atman. And so this is one thing that I want to say, is that I think it's good to prepare for a situation later when we're old, where we can fully dedicate ourselves to hearing and chanting. At the same time, it's not that easy. It's not, and most of us will probably work until we're 67. And for that, I think it's really important not to just see it as, oh, work, you know, like that's where I go just so that I can have food for Krishna on the altar. I mean, or food to eat myself, let's say like this. And to really think about how you can do everything that you do at your job for Krishna. Because Jiva Goswami says we should even brush our teeth for Krishna. So just think if we should do something as mundane as brushing our teeth for Krishna. I mean, at our job, we are doing a service for someone, you know? And the way you do that service, it changes everything. Like there's even, one study comes to my mind of nurses. And there was a group of, like, they compared two types of nurses in a hospital. One nurse, they just did their job like what was written on paper. You know, they made sure that nobody had pain, everybody had food. And the second group of nurses, they did it with some love and some passion. And for example, what they did is they sometimes switched the paintings in the rooms of their patients, just so that they sometimes had something else to see, you know, just a kind gesture. And interestingly enough, those patients, they recovered quicker than the patients who were treated by those nurses that just did everything according to protocol. So this is also how we can express our bhakti in our work, is by just doing everything with love and really seeing what does this person because we all of us here, we serve someone at our job. No matter what we're doing, it's a service. And to think, how can I do it in a way that the person will benefit even more from my service? You know, how can they feel that love and kindness that I feel coming from Krishna? How can they feel that love coming from me? Because that's also, Bhuta Bhavana always says this. If we want to preach to people, we need to make them feel that they are loved, because that's what will open them towards Krishna. if we just come and say there's someone who loves you unconditionally, they'll say, okay, who cares, maybe. But if we show them unconditional love, they will be like, what's going on with you? Why are you always so kind? Why are you so happy? Where's, then they get curious. And then we can even maybe, make them curious towards unconditional love by the way we do our work, by really thinking, how can I do this so that this is really something that helps someone in the best way possible? So those are the two things to your question. One way, I think, yeah, we can definitely make a plan. How can I give this up at some point? Maybe even if I'm old and gray. And how can I do it now in a way that it expresses my bhakti? So I think we have 8 o'clock sharp. I don't know, Karuna Shakti always says that we can go over time if people want to. Let me just say, if someone wants to leave now, we have full understanding. Thank you for being here. And if someone has another question, I'm available to discuss further. But I don't know how, it's in the middle of the week and it's 8 o'clock. Maybe it's also good to stop.
People can come and go at any time, and I think they do. And because I've seen pop up, the names popping up, such and such has joined the waiting room or whatever. And then, well, people have questions, so we can answer them. I think Shumit has a question, and we can always go over time. We all do that quite frequently. I think some weeks ago we even went until 8:30 or something. So we shouldn't, like 8:30 is a bit late, but if there are questions and people feel the need to comment or ask questions, we should honor that. That should be more important than the clock.
Mm-hmm. So you said Sumit has a question. Sumit, would you like to say it?
Yes, Hare Krishna Mataji, please accept my humble obeisances. And yeah, as Prabhuji's already mentioned, it was a really nice lecture. Thanks a lot for that. And my question is also related to the previous two questions, but it's some kind of a bit condensed form. So for me, I'm talking about myself. There are some kind of situations happens that I am not responsible for. Let's say one of my team member or from one of my friend. I have some kind of harsh words, or they had some kind of bad days or something I didn't expect from anyone on the current moment or current situation. Those things hurt me or goes deep inside me, and it stays there for like longer time. And I confess I try to remove those kind of negative things with like hearing and chanting, but it didn't work that way. So I would like to ask you that how can I keep that? I read in different scripture and heard from the lecture that if we wanted to be a devotee, we have to be like sthita pragya. So whatever it happens, we have to have our mind in peace. But for me, like 1 or 2 sentences, 1 or 2 misbehaviors, just ruining my whole day, whole chanting and everything. So I am vulnerable on those things. So my question is, Mataji, how can I be that kind of peaceful in my mind? So then whatever it happens, I can keep myself on the journey to the Lord. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. I think a lot of people, I'm sure that while you were speaking, a lot of the people who are listening now could somehow feel also relate to this, because I think it's something that a lot of people are affected by, especially, the first thing I thought is that it's actually nice to be sensitive, because often we feel like I shouldn't be so sensitive, but actually, I read this in one of Sutta Prabhu's books. He says that we are actually trying to become more sensitive because the ego makes us unsensitive. The ego makes us just think of, what do I want? I don't care what anybody else feels. I don't care of other people's needs. And when we can learn to be more sensitive also towards other people's needs, we actually become more Krishna conscious. But of course, if it hooks us away from Krishna, if we become bound towards negativity and being away from Krishna, then we can see, we should try to see how we can become unbound in those situations. And I thought of two things. The first thing that my Guru Maharaj always says is, he asks it like a question. So he would say, Sumit, if someone gives you a gift, but you don't accept it, who does the gift belong to?
Who gifted me that gift, so I rejected it.
Exactly. So if you don't take the gift, it stays with the person who wanted to give it to you, right? Because that person remains the owner. So the same way, if someone wants to give you negativity or anger, but you don't accept it, it remains their thing. Because actually, when someone is that negative or critical, it's their problem, not yours. And if we can if you can feel that it's already affecting you, think of like some inner picture of giving it back to them, so that it stays with them. And even if they're saying something about you, it doesn't have anything to do with you. It's coming from their mind, it's theirs. So I think this really helps to envision how it's theirs. It belongs to them, not to you. And the second thing I thought of was, which is often like explained or mentioned in our scriptures, is the nature of scorpions. So scorpions, they always sting, even if you help them. And there's this story of a monk that he was trying to pick the scorpion out of water so that the scorpion wouldn't drown, and put the scorpion on land. And the scorpion kept trying to sting that sage. And then the sage friend asked, why are you helping the scorpion? It's going to sting you, it'll hurt you. And the sage said, that's just the nature of the scorpion. It will sting. My nature is to be, or my nature should be, or I want my nature to be merciful. So I will continue to help the scorpion, even if it stings. So I don't think that the story is meant to say that we should sacrifice ourselves to people who are then going to take advantage of us. But I think what the story does say is that some people are just like that, but we shouldn't, we should just stay in our nature. Our nature is to be blissful and happy and serving Krishna, and their nature is to be harsh. And I think it helps to see that it's theirs and that it's their nature. So they will sting no matter who comes by. And if it's Sumit coming by, they try to sting Sumit. If I'm coming by, they try to sting me. But that doesn't have anything to do with you. So that way you can kind of distance yourself from all of that. Yeah, I think those were the things that came to my mind. And also, I mean, this is maybe for all of the situations that all of you mentioned, our main process is to absorb ourselves in Krishna, not so much to become detached. We become detached by becoming attached to Krishna. So another thing we can do in all of these kinds of situations is try to have some thought of Krishna that inspires us. Some story of Krishna that we've heard, some detail that we've heard about him. Just try to remember anything that has to do with Krishna or the devotees that really has touched us in the past, and that we can get connected to again, so that we can get attached to Krishna and unattached from those hurtful comments or what the people said. I hope this kind of was halfway satisfying, Sumit.
Thank you, Mataji. Thanks a lot. Hare Krishna, Mataji.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Does anyone else have anything to add, or a question or something to say?
Yeah, I try it in my English. I'm so tired and my English is not so good. I hope I understand everything in the right way. But Sumit, maybe something can help you. Also, when I have often with people where are not so good in the mood, and the feeling and the knowledge I am on shelter with also Krishna save me. Also he schützt mich praktisch. Yeah, and I'm always in safety. And then my husband Marcus always says, "Oh, he's so bad, and he has so bad thoughts and so bad behavior." And then I say, "We can do nothing. We can do we can do two things to do it better and to be a Vorbild." Was heißt Vorbild?
Example.
Example, and we can spend prasadam. So give a bit cake or something like that. And so when they have prasadam, then sometimes maybe they come to Krishna.
Thank you for that. Yes, definitely. I mean, there are so many things we can do. And also we can just avoid such kind of people. You know, if you have one person at the office that's like that, you know, just try to not cross their path, try to not talk with them too much, you know, just kind of stay away. Not being mean, definitely not being mean. So if they say something in the meeting and they want, you know, you need to answer to them and you need to give them feedback. You can't ignore them. So avoiding someone that you find difficult is not the same as ignoring them. Ignoring them is actually like, that's actually, it can be like, for many people, they feel it's offensive. So, but you know, just keep your distance. I mean, that's fine also. Okay. Looks like we're talked out.
I mean, just to add something, as you said, to just ignore, either to ignore or be kind to someone. And just a funny example where we have one person who doesn't even hurt someone, but at the same time, he wouldn't take it to his mind. So for example, when someone is serious on him, what I learned from him, like you're doing, I mean, so during this feedback sessions, he's so kind. No, I will definitely improve it. Okay, we'll just do it as you said, and so on. And he'll do the same, exactly the same. And the person who tries to change him, he actually changed his behavior. But this guy is not going to change. It's better me, I change it. So yeah, I mean, I think it works, at least in the corporate world, like just act as you're good, but just don't let it go to your head and inside. Just be superficial on the outside, but just, I mean, for devotees, it works much better because, I mean, there's nothing serious, because everything is just temporary here. So for us, it's much more easier. Like, just try to act like you're serious, but at the same time, calculate the pros and cons of it. Just
not to lose sight of what is really important.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it depends on how responsible you are for the situation as well. But yeah.
Okay. Karuna Shakti, what do you think?
That was very nice. And I think there are no more questions. So yeah, probably everything has been said, but I have a little comment to make. You mentioned Krishna Kshetra Swami. When he took sannyas, he said he better be safe than sorry. I remember at that time when he was, some people may know, here in ISKCON, in our institution, we have quite a bit of bureaucracy that has to be done before someone can take an official position or take sannyas. So usually nowadays, people are put on a waiting list, so they won't be getting sannyas immediately. But he was given the green light by the authorities to take sannyas at any point. He was told, you can take sannyas now or tomorrow or whenever you want, because he was already basically living as a sannyasi. There was not much of a difference, maybe externally, the name and the ceremony, the dress, but his lifestyle was that of a sannyasi. And before I announce the next two speakers for the month of May, I can see that Vinuya has raised her hand. I think she has a question or a comment.
Hare Krishna, dear Mangala, please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you very much for your lecture. I need to hear it a couple of times to understand all the things you said. You talked about Sutapa Prabhu, that he wrote, becomes more sensitive, and the ego likes to be unsensitive. I see in my own Bhakti Yoga process that I become really more sensitive, and how can I deal with to be very, very quickly in emotional disbalance, and to become more dependent on nice relationships. I would like to have nice relationships with devotees. How to deal with this increasing sensitivity. And the second part of the question, you said you give back anger to the person from which person it came. What can I do when this is the own mind which does this to me?
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the first question, how to deal with our increasing sensitivity. I think this is interesting. I mean, ultimately, Krishna will show you how to deal with it. You know, like he says in the Bhagavad-gītā that he reveals everything we need to know, he reveals it to us. And what I observe is that, for example, my Guru Maharaj, he's a very sensitive person. And I think that also it comes from his bhakti. That, I mean, I'm sure that, you know, all advanced devotees are sensitive, but I just know him well. So I've observed this with him, that he, for example, I know that he's very conscious about which situations he exposes himself to. So he consciously will not go in certain situations or meet certain people where he knows that they will, you know, be affecting him too much. So I think that, like, because our sensitivity, it will not be from one day to the next suddenly very big. It goes very gradually. And so every time we notice that, oh, this was quite tough, I've become very sensitive towards this, I can't deal with this the same way that I used to, then we know from that moment on, we have to be more careful with that. For example, what happened to me is that I have a really hard time tolerating when someone criticizes a devotee friend. I didn't care so much like 10 years ago, but now I sometimes even, like, I've had it happen that I started crying just because someone said something very harsh about a devotee that helped me a lot in my life. And I felt it wasn't fair to that devotee. And then I realized, okay, so for me, what I now do is that when someone starts to criticize a devotee, I immediately cut that situation off. I immediately go away, or I say, let's not talk about this, or I don't think this is fair to the person. Like, because I know if I hear a lot from this, like, it will just go too much into my this sensitivity that hasn't developed that there. So I think that we learn as we go to avoid those situations and to take care of our heart that is more sensitive. And also at the same time, we are becoming more sensitive. We are also actually becoming spiritually stronger towards negativity and towards not letting it affect us so much. So with this sensitivity, Sutapa Prabhu doesn't really mean that when something negative happens to us, that we then become very, very like disturbed. That's not the kind of sensitivity. Maybe I put it in the wrong context previously, but the sensitivity that he was talking about was really also about towards others and being kind towards others and taking care of others. And of course, we also become more sensitive ourselves. This does happen, but ideally, we actually should also feel that we don't become so easily pulled into negativity and away from Krishna, because we become more attached. We just, like, more naturally, we are more with Krishna. And maybe I will go right to the second question, if you don't mind now. If you have something to add, maybe we can do after. So the second question was how, if our own mind is expressing anger toward ourself, So, I mean, we can kind of even deal with it as if it's coming from someone else, in the sense that, you know, all the anger that we have in our main mind, it did come from somewhere in this material world at some point. It's not us. We are not that anger. We have absorbed it at some point. So that helps to see it as something that is external to us. You know, it's like we have plugged into the wrong movie. This movie is not us, this movie of being angry at ourselves. So we just need to unplug from that movie and see this is not me. And so that's towards like anger that is too much or anger that is misplaced. There's also something like, I would maybe say not anger, but in English, they have this word accountability, which means that we make sure that we do the right things. You know, we're not like, oh, I don't care, you know, I'll just go through life and who cares, but that we have goals and we try to see that we also act accordingly. And if then maybe we become a little, you know, like we notice that, oh, I didn't really behave that well. I actually want to be more Krishna conscious. I wouldn't call this anger, but that's also healthy in a way, if we can see the discrepancy sometimes and just become more motivated. But if it's unhealthy anger, then yeah, to see this is not me, this is coming from, you know, it is in my own head, but it got there by some external influence, and it's also not, you know, the soul doesn't have anything to do with that anger. It's external to the soul. And in that way, we can kind of, you know, give it back to the mind in that sense, or just say, you know, yeah, okay, mind, I see that you have something to say. Thanks for informing me. I will now concentrate on my service again, you know.
Thank you very much, Mangala. All the best to you.
To you too. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice and very interactive and very visual presentation, something which we do not see so often. Humans are usually very focused on visual input, talking. Some people, some professors at university, for example, they have the tendency to talk, just talk. It can work if you are very concentrated, but it can also be very tiring for those who try to listen. I remember at university, there was one teacher, he came in at what was it? I don't know. Sometime in the morning, he took the microphone, he started speaking for 1.5 hours, and then he stopped when the time was over, and then everyone left. And there was hardly ever any situation when there was a question and people were maybe not listening all the time, probably being mentally asleep or even physically asleep. So it helps very much to have some interactive elements and some visual elements, and to have something that is practical and can be nicely understood. And the next 2 speakers that we will have for the month of May are also very experienced at that, especially the next one, Amarendra Prabhu from America. He will be joining us next week. Due to popular demand, we have been able to get hold of him, and he will be speaking about the next verse. And then the week after that, we will have Loka Pavana, who will be joining us from Switzerland. She has already given 2 lectures in the past, you may remember. If you don't, you can watch them or rewatch them on our YouTube channel. So with that, we thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Mangala. And we hope to see you again. We hope to see all of you again. All of you who have joined us from various places, from their homes. And I can see here people are saying thank you for the class and the association. And yeah, thank you for being part of this, for joining us, and hope to see you next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.